Welcome everybody to Empathy in the Workplace, how to build a more engaged and productive team. Just want to start today by asking you just to take a few moments to reflect upon the questions that's on screen. What does empathy actually look like in your workplace? Is empathy actually a skill that is valued within your workplace? And how do you develop empathy within your team? And any thoughts that you've got around those questions, if you just like to pop them in chat for me, that would be really helpful. We develop by listening to others, yeah. Valued in some areas, yeah. Taking an interest in others and caring about them, being willing to ask them if they're okay and what they need. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so another question for you. Which of the following are of most interest to you? And again, if you can just put them in chat, that would be brilliant. You can just use the numbers. Why some leaders struggle to show empathy, ways of developing your empathy skills, the neuroscience of empathy, and empathy in practice. Which of those are you particularly interested in? As I say, just pop the numbers into the chat. That would be brilliant. 1 and 3. Not sure. Excellent. Okay. So we've got buyers for all those areas. So that's good news because we're going to be covering all those areas. So as usual, we'll break our time today into chapters. In chapter 1, we're going to be looking at why empathy is an important skill, both for leaders and for team members. Chapter 2 will focus more on empathy as a skill that can be learnt and what skills do empathetic people demonstrate. Chapter 3, some of the latest thinking and research. And then in chapter 4, we're going to be looking at some of the tools and brain-based strategies to enhance empathy in the workplace. For those of you who perhaps don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan. I'm founding partner and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. And I started my career out in the hospitality sector originally before moving into learning and development some 25 years or so ago now. And my kind of background since moving into learning and development is I've got a degree in psychology, but I'm also very much been, I'll say, a student of neuroscience for the last 12 years or so, studying the latest research and looking at what we can actually learn and how we can apply that research into the world of work. So, chapter 1. Why empathy is important. Do you want to just pop your thoughts into the chat box for me, please, of why you think empathy is important in the workplace? Strengthens connections and builds trust, build relationships, understanding to help people, yeah. Improve communication. Absolutely, yes. So empathy in the workplace is important because it allows people to connect with each other on a deeper level, and it can help to build, as you quite rightly say, it can help to build trust, foster collaboration, and create more positive and productive working environments. And if we just look at a little bit deeper at that, some of the kind of specific benefits. Improved communication, we said about. When people are able to empathise with each other, they're better able to understand each other's perspective and communicate more effectively. So that can actually lead to better decision making, fewer conflicts, stronger relationships. We also can get increased employee engagement because employees who feel valued and supported by the managers and colleagues are more likely to be engaged in the work. So that can then lead on in turn to higher productivity, better customer service, greater innovation. Collaboration begins with empathy. It's the key to a productive and functioning relationship. Reduced turnover. Employees who feel connected to their workplace are less likely to leave. Improve customer service, because empathetic employees are better able to understand and meet the needs of the customer. So that can lead to higher levels of customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. Empathy is also important for leaders, because leaders who are empathetic are better able to build trust and rapport with their team members. They're also better able to understand and address the needs of team members, which again can lead to that higher performance and higher levels of engagement. Empathy is also the key to influencing psychologically safe working environments. So what is empathy? We'll take a look at what empathy is. The first thing to say is that it's one of those words that we all use, but it can mean different things to different people. For example, it's often used wrongly when someone is being sympathetic towards another. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is very different to sympathy. When we're being sympathetic, we're often not being that helpful to the person, because we may be saying indirectly that we are feeling sorry for them, which could be perceived by them in a negative manner, as much as we're saying, well, I'm okay, you're not okay. Or it could be that we're being perceived as offering unwanted help or advice. So what is empathy then? Just let you read the definition on screen. So Professor Simon Baron-Cohen is a neuroscientist interested in empathy, an author of 0 Degrees of Empathy. And he describes empathy as having two components. This includes a cognitive component, which is the drive to identify another person's thoughts and feelings, and an affective component, which is the drive to respond appropriately to another person's thoughts and feelings. He proposes that both components are necessary to describe someone as showing empathy. Psychopaths can cognitively make assumptions about another person's thoughts and feelings and predict they may be experiencing pain, physical or psychological, but they don't care or don't respond appropriately. According to Professor Baron-Cohen, we each have different capacities to demonstrate empathy. This individual capacity is determined by both our genetic makeup and by environmental factors. In effect, empathy is not just one thing, it's an umbrella term that describes multiple ways that we respond to one another. It's possible to actually take Professor Baron-Cohen's work and divide it down further into 3 components: thinking, sharing, and caring. And this model breaks the affective empathy down further into that sharing and caring components. So thinking, often referred to as cognitive empathy or perspective taking, it's about understanding what and how the other person is experiencing, knowing what they will be thinking about and what they will be doing. Cognitive empathy is important for performance feedback and communication in general. If a person only has cognitive empathy, then they can use it to manipulate and take advantage of others, as they don't really feel the other person's pain or pleasure. Sharing, often referred to as experience sharing or emotional empathy. I feel with you. I feel your distress. Through the mirror neurons in the brain, we respond to the pain or pleasure of others as if we were experiencing it ourselves. Sharing or emotional empathy is particularly important for rapport building in relationships, teamwork. If we only have emotional empathy and our work involves giving bad news on a regular basis, such as in healthcare settings or during periods of large-scale redundancy, for example, it can lead to emotional exhaustion and possibly burnout due to the picking up on the emotions being experienced by people receiving the bad news. We saw a lot of this during the pandemic with frontline staff working in the NHS and care sector. Caring or empathetic concern is a felt sense. It provides the motivation that when we see someone in trouble, we instinctively want to help them. When we have empathetic concern, we take time out to help others, to give them feedback. We're concerned with helping others to be better. Empathetic concern is what differentiates an outstanding leader. However, in the uncertain and volatile world where we're all experiencing challenging times, leaders need to be able to operate at full strength in all three areas of empathy. Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about being responsible for the people who do the job. A leader's job is about being concerned about human beings and not just concern for results. People must come first. And if all the leaders are focusing on is results, just think about what message is actually being given out to the people. When times are tough, less empathetic managers probably believe that they've got no choice and they'll blame it on other things, other people, the government, the market, the shareholders. But when things get tough, more empathetic leaders find a way to look after their people, to protect their people, to safeguard their people. So as always, we'll just stop there for a moment and just take a moment's reflection and just some kind of thoughts for you to think about. How empathetic are your leaders? Do your leaders operate in all three areas of empathy? What messages are being communicated in your organisation? Is there a balance between empathy or caring for people with the results and outcomes? So I'm going to stop for just a few moments just to let you have a think about that. And by all means, if you want to share anything in chat, please do so. Okay, we'll move on to chapter 2 then. Empathy skills. You may recall earlier that I said that according to Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, we each have different capacities to demonstrate empathy. And this individual capacity is determined by both our genetic makeup and by environmental factors. The great news is that empathy is like any other skill. We can grow and develop our empathy. The more we focus our attention on being empathetic, and the more we practice empathy through the neuroplasticity of the brain, we're able to strengthen our neural networks and develop our empathy skills. So a question for you now, and again, answers in chat, please. What skills do we need to be empathetic? Good listener, curiosity. Non-judgmental, listening, patience, yeah. Approachable, open. Yeah, absolutely. Just some of the other ones that I kind of think about is perception taking, mindful listening. We've got listening there, being present, having focused attention, being there in the moment with the individual or group of people. So another question for you then, what are some of the actual behaviours that we see in leaders who have got these higher levels of empathy? What are some of the actual behaviours? Again, answers it in chat, please. Read by example, listen, care, yeah. Better teams, open communicating, respect, emotional intelligence, take an interest in the staff, ask for feedback. Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'll just share with you a few some of the thoughts that we've got here. So some of those behaviours include listening deeply, verbal and non-verbal communication, asking questions, showing more than just a passing interest in team members, acknowledging how the person or people are feeling, connecting with their pain, their worry, help the individuals feel supported, and also helps to validate what they're going through is difficult. Leaders express their own vulnerability and open up and share their vulnerability and feelings. They show gratitude to others for opening up to them, because when someone opens up to you, it shows that they really trust you, and that trust should be acknowledged. Supportive actions and gestures, so perhaps offering a more flexible working arrangements for a person who's going through a challenging situation in their personal life, for example. Asking how they can help, offering help, not telling the person what they need, but asking what they think they need, how they think that they can help, and then taking action and following through. One of the challenges facing leaders is that despite their efforts to elevate empathy within the organisation, team members don't always feel it on the ground floor. And this disconnect occurs for various reasons. But one of those reasons can be that empathy sometimes can feel a little bit like a fuzzy, touchy-feely kind of concept. And this is usually down to a lack of understanding of what it actually means to be an empathetic organisation. Being an empathetic organisation or an empathetic leader doesn't mean that we have to give everybody hugs all the time, or that we have to give into everybody's wants and whims, or that we can't give honest feedback. When leaders show empathy, people feel safe. They tend to take more risks, be more creative, engaged, and inclusive. In addition to empathy being perceived by some as fuzzy, leaders may lack empathy due to various other reasons, such as the organisational structures or systems which prevent or perhaps don't reward empathetic behaviour. Some people just turn up for work and they don't have passion or belief in the work that they do. They're not engaged. And empathy actually requires an investment of time and energy. And so some people may just not be motivated to give that time and energy. Also, there's a kind of biological reason. The neural pathways that we use to think about other people are the same neural pathways we use to think about ourselves. Now, leaders tend to spend time focusing on results, share prices, and spend very little time thinking about themselves. Therefore, the neural pathway that actually thinks our empathy, if you like, neural pathway, the neural pathways that we use when we're thinking about ourselves and other people, tend to be not terribly well developed. They have a high electrical resistance, meaning that it's really draining on the individual's energy. So as the brain is wired for survival and energy conservation is actually part of that, then they're less likely to use the neural circuitry, making it harder to think about people. And it's that old adage of people focus versus task focus. There's also a link between being in a position of power and empathy. Some research done by Michael Krauss at Yale found that people who were less privileged, poor, or lonely tended to be more empathetic. And this was because of their survival instinct of needing other people. But as people rise in power, often they feel they have everything and they don't really need others, so they don't have the same motivation to be empathetic. This is not to say that they cannot be empathetic. It's about awareness and finding a way past those motivational barriers that can get in the way of that empathetic connection. The fifth reason why a leader may lack empathy can be explained by way of behavioural preferences. Some behavioural preferences lend themselves to higher levels of empathy. For example, people who have a thinking preference, who focus on facts, figures, strategies and results, will have to work hard to show empathy in comparison to an individual who has a feeling preference. When we start to explore thinking versus feeling preferences and empathy, we can start to see some of the reasons why leaders who have higher levels of self-awareness tend to have higher levels of empathy. An individual with a thinking preference may find it quite hard to express their feelings and vulnerabilities, whereas a person may not express their vulnerability because they don't want to burden the other person. They just want to help. A person with a feeling preference will tend to have a higher level of motivation, that empathetic concern I spoke about earlier. Whereas a person with a thinking preference may increase the range of their empathetic concern by reframing empathy for others as a way to help the individual grow and perform, which in turn will get the result or outcome. What they are doing is driving that feeling action with a thinking motivation. We've already said that empathy isn't fixed. We all have an empathy range, and with practice, we can develop and increase our range. By being self-aware and understanding our behavioural preferences, it helps us to identify development areas that we might wish to focus on to increase our empathetic range. So, for example, a person with a thinking preference may consider working on their curiosity and widening their circle of contacts, whereas a person with a feeling preference may be more prone to emotional exhaustion and burnout if they're not aware of a tendency to get emotionally involved. So they may need to practice letting go and be more objective. Leaders must know who they are, their strengths, their preferences, their passions and areas of development, as these are the foundations of empathy and success. Behavioural profiling tools such as Jigsaw Discovery will provide insight into your preferences, your range of empathy. It will help you to foster opportunities to adapt your thinking and behaviour to be more productive and appreciate your motivators, strengths and judgmental areas and development areas. Jigsaw Discovery can provide insights into how others see you and help you understand their feelings and preferences. And leaders who have those higher levels of self-awareness and understanding of others tend to have increased range of empathy and be seen by others as empathetic. So again, we'll just pause for a moment or two just to take some reflection. How empathetic are you? Are you good at listening? Can you sense how other people are feeling? Do you take time to think about how other people may be feeling and what their thoughts may be? So I'll just pause for a moment, let you have a think. So chapter 3, the neuroscience of empathy. So there's a growing body of work that suggests we come to understand and share in the experience of others by commonly recruiting the same neural structures, both during our own experience and while observing others undergoing the similar kind of experience. Matthew Lieberman is one of the world's leading authorities in the field of social neuroscience and author of the book Social: Wired to Connect. Now Lieberman, and I'll let you read what's on screen, this is how he sees empathy in human beings. He sees humans as being particularly socially influenced. So what he believes is that we are not individuals. I think it said sealed units. We actually take in the experiences of other people. We let in other people's beliefs, and that actually then helps us to ensure that we all kind of have the same kind of beliefs and values as the people around us. And he believes that's a great catalyst then for social harmony. And the way that we do this is through those mirror neurons that I spoke about. When we are experiencing pain, the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC in the brain, is active. And we also see activation in the same region when we observe somebody else experiencing pain. So such mirror mechanisms actually seem equally active when we judge others' actions and when we process their experiences, sensations, and emotions. While observing such emotional information, the mirror neuron system makes it possible to generate a brain state that matches that of the person being observed, providing a kind of automatic kind of share, a connection of that experience. It's also important that we just kind of take a moment to look at some of the barriers to empathy. As a cognitive process, empathy is affected by the state of our mental resources. Tasks that require high levels of ongoing empathy can lead to fatigue, and especially in response to stress and stressful situations. And there are 4 barriers to empathy that we really do need to be aware of. Prejudice. We're prone to stereotyping, making those snap judgments based on first impressions and projecting our biases and preconceptions onto people, while actually knowing very little about the reality of their lives. Authority is another barrier. One of the greatest obstacles to empathy, in fact, is the human tendency to obey authority. Obedience to authority is not simply an innate trait embedded in human nature, but it's actually influenced by context and culture, which we learn from a very young age. Distance. There are 3 forms of distance that can become a barrier to our capacity to empathise. First of all, spatial distance relates to our capacity to care about people we do not know and whose lives are far away and unfamiliar to us. Social distance relates to a cognitive bias towards people who are more like us through work, play, education, religion, etc. Highly empathetic people make efforts to look through the eyes of strangers and people who are outside of their in-group. Temporal difference relates to our ability to empathise with generations that came before us and those who will be here long after us. And the last one, denial. Human beings are very skilled at inventing convenient reasons why we don't need to act to relieve the suffering of others. And through our acts or omissions, we are experts at avoiding responsibility when it suits us. Highly empathetic people are instead aware that such reasoning may well be a form of denial, designed to relieve them of a sense of guilt or perhaps even moral responsibility to help other people. So let's just look at empathy in practice as we come into the final chapter now. So ways that we can actually start to develop our empathy. The first one, make curiosity a habit. Imagine you're in a supermarket and you see a mum with a young child who's having a full-blown tantrum. And the mother appears to be doing or saying very little. She appears to have lost control. Now, do you think to yourself, she's a terrible mum, just standing there while her kid just kicks off? Some people shouldn't be allowed to have kids. Or what if you actually asked yourself, I wonder what's going on for the mum? Maybe she's feeling overwhelmed. Maybe she's sleep deprived, got a headache, or perhaps just not really sure what to do. Maybe she could do with a friendly face and some support or reassurance. By being curious, you switch from being judgmental to asking questions and perspective taking, which might lead to increased empathetic concern and motivation, perhaps, to even reach out to the mum. Widen your circle. Empathy, especially for people outside of your circle, outside of your in-group, the people you identify with, starts by reaching out to people that you may not normally mix with and talk to. And research has found that contact with people outside of your normal circle or people who are in your out-group increases our empathy towards them at a neurological level. Within organisational life, if you're a senior manager, your in-group will be other senior managers. So spending time and getting to know junior members of staff will help you to be more empathetic towards the way they are thinking, feeling, and what they're actually experiencing. Another strategy, you can practice your empathy skills on fictional characters. It turns out you can practice empathy skills by reading fictional books. And the reason why is because they usually have quite complex characters which drive the story and draw the readers in emotionally to their desires and their motivations. And just a few books up there, just that we know are very, very good for developing empathy. A simple way of thinking how to demonstrate empathy without moving into sympathy can be achieved by the components described in the WALK model of empathy. And this model was created by Linda Ray from Neurocapability in 2019. And the model is, first of all, what might be top of mind? What might be top of mind for the person or the group that you're interacting with? What is top of mind for you? Is your own thinking getting in the way of demonstrating empathy? The second stage then is arousal. Are you or they in a threat state? What do you notice about their effect? How might they be feeling? How are you feeling? Do you need to self-regulate, or do you need to perhaps support them to self-regulate their emotions? Look for ways to show your empathy. Ask tentative, exploratory, curious questions. It sounds like you are feeling X. I might too feel X if I was in a similar situation. Look for cognitive biases that may be at play. Find ways to mitigate the impact of these. Look out for moving into problem solving or solution finding. Look out for when you may be stepping out of empathy and stepping into sympathy. And lastly, keep your mind open and stay curious. Keep checking your assumptions. Keep showing that you care about the person or the group and what happens to them. So that's the WALK model by Linda Ray. Use language that will help to maintain and strengthen relationships. Ask questions with the intention of seeking to understand, and listen mindfully. Be present in the moment. Give your full attention. And here are just a few examples of empathetic communication. And then a few examples of questions that you can ask when you're being curious. So, for the last time today, we'll stop and just ask you to kind of just take a minute or two for reflection over what we've discussed today. And what are some of your key takeaways from today? And then if you could just type those in chat for me, that would be brilliant. So what are some of your key takeaways from today? That would be great. Getting out our own assumptions and judgments before opening the mouth. Keeping sympathy and empathy separate. Yeah. Any other takeaways from today? What are you going to be doing more of, less of, differently? Yeah. Importance of being concerned about human beings, not just results. Remembering the importance of the skill. Yeah. Encourage leaders with a different management style that empathy is not a weakness. Far from it. Yeah. Brilliant. Have more check-ins with people. Yeah. Again, very, very important. If we want to get the best out of our people, then we've got to have more human skills in our workplaces and have more human connection. Okay, so if there are any questions at all, I am very happy to take any questions. If you want to just pop them in chat, that will be lovely. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today.